Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend, Mr. Fused Fiction Hub, bringing you another amazing story. This is the next part of the story, 2 Feet Short by Garrett Wellist. Chapter 7. Torino-sensei huffed as he jumped off of Toshinori's stomach, pushing all air from his lungs. After catching his breath, he sat up to meet the old man's glare with a lot less confidence than he'd hoped. Where were you last night? I came and everyone said you left for some sleepover. He crossed his arms over but interrupted when Izuku made an attempt to answer his question. I don't really care about whatever you are doing. Just don't make an old man run around to find you. What are you doing here, Grand Torino? Izuku asked, sounding much calmer than Toshinori felt. Chio called me, said you two idiots were making life hard for her again. But really, when aren't you? He huffed and gestured toward the younger boy. You've been a thorn in her side ever since she met you, and adding Midoriya and just makes it worse. With a sigh he sat down. Nezu also wanted to have a meeting. A meeting? I thought we had already discussed our next plan of action. Toshinori dared to speak up, flinching from every move his teacher made. Yeah, but they want to talk about One for All. He sat up. Toshinori wasn't completely sure why he had sat down in the first place and marched toward the main building, his yellow cape flowing behind him. Common, slowpokes, he wants it over with before classes start. Getting up quickly, both boys followed the short hero through the front gate, listening to him ramble on about how much of a mess they had made and how annoying it was going to be to clean up. There was no point in actively listening to it. It would only make the blonde feel more guilty than he already did. Welcome, All Might and Midoriya. We've been waiting for you too. Nezu's soft voice came from down the hall, in front of the door leading into the conference room. I feel like these meetings never stop, Toshinori muttered, earning a soft laugh from Nezu. They had already had 2 meetings over the past day, making this the third. It's a much-needed meeting, I assure you. The mouse pushed open the heavy door and walked inside, his hands folded nicely behind his back. Now, I doubt I will have to introduce our guests, seeing as you two are the reason they were invited. That made Toshinori hesitate. Guests? They? So Torino-sensei wasn't the only one visiting for this. Who knew turning into a 12-year-old would cause so much backlash? But this wasn't just about him. If it were, then hardly anyone would care to find a way to reverse the effect. Izuku was the one whose life was messed up because of this. A new wave of guilt washed over him like water. Once he saw the guests Nezu had mentioned, he stopped, his heart beating 3 notches faster. Sharp yellow eyes pierced through him like a knife. He hadn't seen those eyes for years and hadn't expected to see them ever again. Not a full meter away sat his ex-sidekick and best friend, Tsunade. He looked just as he did all those years ago, thin, tall and professional. His tie was still just as ugly, but he couldn't focus on his silly tie. Not when the man stared at him as if he had just suffocated his mother. It made his hands shake and his forehead sweat. Detective Tsukaki, his best friend, held back a laugh, both hands covering his mouth to suppress any noise that might slip out. In any other situation, Toshinori wouldn't have been offended by his friends laughing. It made sense, but this was a dire situation. Izuku's future was at risk and Sir's presence kept him in a bad mood. Gran Torino pushed him into the room, muttering about manners and keeping them waiting. Izuku looked nervous as well, but he didn't shake. Deciding he'd had enough of being in Sir's direct field of vision, the blonde hid behind Izuku's thick legs, sitting in the chair furthest from the hero. Sadly, that seat was closest to Torino-sensei. What had he done wrong to have to choose between sitting next to his old teacher and Tsunade? Now that we're all here, why don't we start with a few questions? I know some of you may have some. Nezu turned his vision toward Namasa, who was now composed enough to speak without the threat of laughing. Thank you, Principal Nezu. I'd like to ask when this whole thing started, and is it really so extreme that it required all of us? He looked toward Sir specifically. It was a good question. Not even the revelation of All for One's return or his retirement called for Tsunade's presence. I understand that this may not seem very important, but the future of this school's heroes depends on you 3 being here. As we all know, these 2 share the bond of One for All, and we are led to believe that sage change may be an effect of that same connection. But why are we here? Torino-sensei grumbled. Can't they just figure it out on their own, if it's really between them? Well, All Might had informed me that this change had never taken place before, if he is not mistaken. Nope, this never happened with his master. That is why I called for everyone who knows about this court to give their insight on the matter. As smart as these 2 may be, this is a matter for more than just them. Midoriya's future as a hero also depends on us finding the answer, and as soon as possible. Nezu sat back in his chair, returning his attention to the rest of the room. It was quiet for a while. Toshinori felt a nudge at his shoulder and looked up to meet Izuku's eyes. He looked concerned. Did the blonde really look that pitiful? Izuku mouthed the words, "Are you okay?" He definitely looked pitiful. Sitting up, the blonde gave his student his best smile, adding a thumbs up for emphasis. It seemed to confuse him more than comfort him. If this is truly a matter of their bond, Then why has this never happened before? There can't be another quirk that we didn't know about at play, Namasa commented. Both to All Might and Izuku Midoriya were quirkless before receiving the quirk, and this would have happened before if it had already been a part of the stockpiling. Torino-sensei nodded in agreement. Out of all 4 holders I've met who carried one for all, this is the very first time this sort of thing happened. The room was quiet after that. Toshinori knew he'd likely stay silent for the rest of the meeting. Any information he could possibly supply was useless. Gran Torino knew the patterns of this quirk better than he himself did. Namasa was used to looking into similar quirk cases like this, and Sir had 10 times the brilliance the blonde did, and Nezu stood by himself. There was no point in speaking up. Izuku seemed to have come to the same conclusion. As much of a fanboy as he was, he had barely had one for all or a full year now. Funny that the 2 people affected by this strange string of events knew the least. I assume you've already ruled out the possibility of an outside quirk coming into play. Sir Nightai spoke for the first time. You wouldn't ask specifically for insight on one for all unless you were sure. Nezu nodded, going into the details of the investigation. Izuku had been on campus all day. Toshinori didn't remember coming into contact with anyone but civilians on his way home, and the effects would likely activate immediately. Some residents around his neighborhood were asked for testimonies as well, but no one could give one if nothing happened. The fact that this couldn't be from some rookie villain trying his luck made Toshinori feel even more useless than before. So much for learning everything about his quirk. He had spent his entire lifetime, at least more than 3/4 of it, training with this quirk, looking around each turn and corner of the maze of one for all just to walk into a trap set by those before him. We don't have record of every quirk stockpiled into one for all, Namasa started. It's likely that someone had a quirk that took a bit more searching to key into. Maybe Midoriya had. This is not Izuku's fault. Toshinori stood in his chair, giving his best friend a hard look. It's not his fault he lost over half of his lifetime. It's not his fault that we're a mess that everyone has to find time to fix. It's not his fault. He ignored the voice telling him to calm down. No matter who it was, he wasn't going to watch someone talk about his boy like that. Any loving father would do the same. Torino-sensei flicked his arm and huffed out a command to sit down and shut up. He ignored it. Namasa immediately backtracked and spoke like he would when addressing a traumatized witness. He hated it. Izuku started stuttering beside him, saying that it was fine, likely even. Hearing his boy admit to doing anything so wrong, to condemn himself to this torture, fueled his rage. I mean, you keep telling me to dig down, to connect to one for all. Maybe I did do this. He was sweating with nerves, sharply turning his attention to Izuku, making the grown man flinch under his glare. Then that's my fault, he stated, calming ever so slightly to the guilt. It's my fault for being a bad teacher, for telling you to do something that hurt you. It's entirely my fault, Izuku, not yours. He held Izuku by his head, making sure the man kept eye contact. Almighty broken bar, Izuku whimpered, tears forming. Oh number, lightening his gaze. Toshinori let go of the man's face, trying to think of anything that would stop the tears. He didn't mean to make such a scene. Sir Nightai interrupted his thoughts, drawing both of their attention. If this is your fault, All Might, the way he said his name emphasized the 6 years of distance between them, then tell us how to fix this. If you're so willing to take all the credit, then you shouldn't have an issue with that. It wasn't a challenge. He knew the man long enough to tell. A broken bar, his throat betrayed him, closing and refusing to let any words leave. He couldn't fix this. He didn't even know how it happened in the first place. Swallowing thickly, he sat back down, looking away from all the eyes. It felt similar to when he had shown the world his weak form. Are you saying that you can't? Sir pressed. Toshinori glared at his shaking hands, wishing the floor would swallow him up. What is the point in shouldering this entire mishap when you have no means of fixing it? What does it matter whose fault it is if we're all working together to find a solution? The air was thick, hard to breathe. The guilt choked him, but this guilt was different. It didn't plague him with reminders of the fate Izuku was in because of him. No. This guilt scolded him for being so plainly stupid. Like always, it came in the voice of everyone who had told him to slow down, to stop pushing them away and share just a fraction of his burden. This guilt made him wish he could trust them. Let us continue with this meeting. Then, if this situation is temporary, then we should find out whether it's a matter of time, or the meeting continued without him. He didn't dare look at Izuku or anyone else for that matter. He knew the concerned looks would only make the twisting in his gut worse. For being so brave, he was a coward when it came to others' pity. It crawled under his skin, poking him in all the worst ways. Toshinori vaguely heard Nezu dismiss everyone and a few scraping chairs. He took his opportunity to march out as quickly as possible without actually running. He turned down the hall, ignoring the buzzing of his phone in his pocket, and headed straight for the teacher's lounge. He shut the door and climbed onto his black chair. It spun when he put weight onto it, proving impossible to get onto without lowering the height, so he did. Once in his favorite chair, he looked through a few papers on his desk, not really planning to start reading them. He wouldn't really be teaching anyway, just helping. Pulling the blanket he hid for late night grading out from under his desk, He wrapped himself into a cocoon and glared at the wall. He knew they were all right. He was being hormonal. Stupid. He was trying to take all responsibility for this, but it didn't stop him from doing it. It never really did. Don't tell me you're taking after my sleeping habits too. A low, rough voice made Toshinori jump. Turning, he saw Aizawa curled into his yellow sleeping bag, staring at him from under his own desk. A strange place to sleep, especially with the couch unoccupied. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. He felt bad. Aizawa was always tired and really didn't get enough nip time to make up for his lost hours. He was depriving the better teacher of his functionability. You're better than Hisashi. He closed his eyes again, looking like he had gone back to sleep before speaking again. Still couldn't find a way to get Midoriya back to his original age number. He really didn't want to talk about that meeting, especially with his hormones still rushing through his system. Did you have to leave to control yourself again? He asked dryly. It stung. Remembering his quick-forming reputation from making scenes at informational meetings, he pressed his fingers against his cheeks until they lifted on their own. Not this time. Sorta. I made it through the meeting at least, he muttered. Maybe meetings just aren't the best for you emotionally. Was that a joke? It made Toshinori laugh, regardless of the humor intended. Right. Hero work is quite the active career path. I'm surprised I can sit through them. You don't. The dry answer made him laugh again. You have a point, Aizawa. Checking the time, Toshinori slowly slipped out of his cocoon and smoothed out the uniform he still wore. I'll see you for hero training, Aizawa. With a slow nod from the other, the young blonde set out for his first class, in a remarkably better mood than he had been in just a minute before. Thanks for listening to this tale. Make sure you comment, like and subscribe and have a wonderful day.